Hey guys, and welcome to tonight's webinar. So tonight we're going to talk about reading, right? Yesterday I put up in the Facebook group, who wants a reading list, and I was so shocked to find that there were so many parents who were, wanting book recommendations, scouring the internet for different books and, things of that nature. And so, it honestly really surprised me. So I hope that, my insights tonight will help you. So immediately, if you guys just want the book list and just leave the video, that's fine. The book list is in the description, right? So if you guys go to the description, that is going to be where you find the book list, right? So I've got a link to a book list on our website. It'll be in a Google Doc, and I'll obviously go through the books and talk about which ones you should start with and which ones you should probably progress through and which ones are easy and which ones are more difficult. So I would probably recommend to stay tuned and, watch all of this video before you kind of leave. But obviously you guys can do whatever you want to do. The main thing that I want to talk about today is not only the book list, but how to actually approach reading, right? Because I know a lot of parents have this problem with their kids where, your kids just hate reading, right? Your kids, don't want to read difficult books. Your kids just want to read books which obviously don't challenge them. And every single time you try to encourage them to read complex books or to read books which are difficult, it's like this battle, right? I know this because when I was a kid, my mom did the same with me, right? It was always a constant battle to get me to read, right? And I want to kind of give you guys my insight on that and also provide a little bit of a solution. The other kind of problem that we deal with is a lot of parents ask me, Stephen, how do you go about reading to improve reading comprehension, right? And so again, there's a bit of a double-edged sword there, which I want to address. And actually, the fastest way to improve reading comprehension is not actually to read books, which I'll mention in a little bit, because I know that's a bit controversial, right? But there are all of these little intricacies and minute kind of, things that you need to be aware of, okay? So I think where we need to start from is the kind of common recommendation, the general recommendation that everyone follows, which is reading books will improve your English. Now, I want to kind of take that, kind of common notion and kind of tease it around a little bit, right? Like go over some of the some of the problems with that very, very big general advice, and also talk about why that probably doesn't work for 99% of you out there. So you guys have all heard teachers say, hey, reading is going to increase your reading comprehension ability. Reading is going to help your English. Reading is going to help this. Reading is going to help that. Reading is going to help whatever. That's like saying to a overweight person that exercise will make you more fit. And I hope you guys understand the analogy that I'm trying to make, which is that, reading in itself is great, right? If you read properly and you know how to do it with correct form, right? And you're reading and you're actually reading and your child's actually, understanding everything that they read, of course, their English is going to improve, right? If they're reading challenging texts and they're going through and they're understanding every single word, they're engaging with it, they're excited, they're curious, of course they're going to learn. Of course their English is going to improve. But the unfortunate thing for 99% of you who are either, just borrowing books from a local library, not really knowing which books to read, is that most kids aren't curious readers. Most kids aren't willing to push themselves in terms of the difficulty of books that they read, right? And so what happens is, these kids obviously, reading these books over and over again, or reading like simple books, or when they read difficult books, they're just kind of skimming through it, not understanding the vocab and not learning anything. So really, when you say that reading increases your English ability or reading increases your writing ability, I can show you many, many students who read a lot or claim to read a lot who have terrible English abilities and who have terrible writing abilities. You know what I mean? And the problem behind all of this becomes is due to the fact that there is no feedback mechanism when you're reading. So let me repeat that again. There is no feedback mechanism when you read. What do I mean by that? So when your child's laying in bed, reading their book, you don't really know how much they've understood. They're never told if they interpreted something wrongly, right? And they just read. There is no feedback mechanism. There is no timing. There is no accuracy. There is no feedback for them to understand whether or not they've read correctly, whether or not they actually understand the passage, whether or not they actually understand the author's intention, and all of those things. And oftentimes kids know this, right? So that's why they're like, you know what, Mum, I just want to read, right? And they just go off and they read their little book, and you think that they're actually building their English ability. And The unfortunate thing is a lot of parents, come to me and they're like, my child's been reading, hour a day, 2 hours a day. They're so excited every single time I read. I'm like, yeah, because they're not reading. If you're actually reading and you're truly immersed in your reading, it's not a relaxing feat. It requires you to think. It requires you to engage. It requires, you to actively Google words and figure out what words mean. So if they're lying in bed, they haven't even touched a computer, they haven't touched a dictionary, either number one, the book they're reading is too simple, or number two, they're not reading properly. And if they're not reading properly, then they're not reading at all, which means that all the time that you spend apparently reading is wasted. Okay? So that's kind of my general gist on it. So especially for the kids that I have who are in the younger years, I don't even start them on book lists. The reason why is because doing reading comprehension at least ensures that we know, okay, wait a second, this kid got this question wrong, this kid got this question wrong. There is an active feedback mechanism. You can see directly how long they're spending on each question. And with those metrics, you can calculate, hey, wait a second, they've got a weakness in nonfiction, they've got a weakness in fiction, they've got a weakness here and there, right? It's not ideal, but it's what we have to do, right? If I had my own kids, obviously I'd spend, 5-6 hours a day, 3-4 hours a day with them, making sure that they understood every single little detail, right? But unfortunately, most parents don't have the time nor the ability to read the same books that their kids are reading, ask them questions about, intricate details, and be able to, go through that process. So in other words, in a way, unless you have, very intricate knowledge of the book and the book very, very well, you're not really going to be able to test your child on their knowledge of the book, right? Which means already you've kind of failed step one, which is a feedback. And so what I would recommend is if your child is currently weak, if they're currently getting like below 50% in our diagnostic tests, or they're getting below 50% in, various areas, you need to understand that they need to do more reading comprehension now. Okay, they don't need to read more. Okay, reading more for a kid who's getting like 20% of reading comprehension is not going to help their reading at all. Because again, if they can't even do reading comprehension, how are you going to, read a proper book and understand the whole book? You know what I mean? So that's kind of some contrarian advice. I know that goes against what normal teachers say and what, the general consensus is out there. But from my many years of experience, from my many years of teaching kids, this is what works, right? The second fallacy is that apparently reading helps you write better. Yeah, that's true. Again, if you read everything properly and if you memorize everything that you read. But the unfortunate thing is most kids just read. They might even understand what they read, but if you're not memorizing what you read, if you're not copying and adopting the author's style of language use, right? If you're not memorizing the key elements of description, the words, the exact phrases, if you're not writing them down and engaging with it actively, your writing is never going to improve. Okay? So it's like, I'll give you guys an example right now. If you did a scientific experiment, right? You had 10 kids and you gave them Harry Potter, the Harry Potter book, and you asked them to read the whole Harry Potter book. And you're like, you know what? Read Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Read it. Don't write anything out. Just read it. Right? And then you had another group of kids, let's say 10 kids, and you said, hey, you know what? All I want you to do is just copy out one page of Harry Potter and then turn it into your own language, use WordHippo, use different tools on the internet, and turn it into your own language, right? Who do you think is going to improve more in writing? The kid who read 200 pages of Harry Potter, or the kid who spent all their time on just one page of Harry Potter, going through it very carefully, writing down every single phrase, and finding synonyms and writing it out and thinking about it, engaging with it. Obviously, the second kid. And yet, most parents are like, no, my kid's improving in terms of their writing. All they need to do is just read and they're going to improve. It's not the case, right? It is not the case at all. There are very curious children. There are very engaged children who read for hours, who immerse themselves in the language. But again, those kids all had very strong foundations in English and writing from a very young age, right? And that was also built up by the kid, by the parents, right? So if you're currently in the below the 50% range, and you're getting advice of, hey, just read. And as a parent, you're not even like checking what they're reading. And, if they're actually learning anything, if they're actually understanding what they read, then you're just wasting your time. Like, to be completely honest, you should just close this video and just do more reading comprehension. Okay? That's just my honest opinion. Unless you're willing to spend the time to sit next to your child, read through every single page with them, test them out on every single little bit of detail, then they're just wasting their time. Okay? The other thing that I want to talk about is reading habits. Right? So when we talk about reading habits, it's like, if your child is sitting in bed just reading, aimlessly, again, that's not the best reading habit to adopt, right? Again, the best thing for children to do is obviously to sit at a desk, read properly, and read the right books. And we'll talk about the right books in a second. Now, the second question that I get from parents is, well, Stephen, I'm stuck in a conundrum because, my kid wants to read all of these kind of, silly books, Captain Underpants, books which are, immature for aimed at a younger target audience. But I want them to read these books that I saw on the Premier's Reading Challenge list, these books that are a lot more complex, but they refuse to read it. So what do I do? And so that's a really good question. That's a really, really good question because I know exactly how you feel. I understand exactly how you feel. And I know that this is definitely a pain that a lot of parents go through, right? Now, the thing that you need to be aware of as a parent is that you can't force a child to read anything, okay? You cannot force children to read anything that they don't want to read. That's a really important concept for you guys to understand. You should never force a child to read something that they don't want to read because, again, they're most likely not going to understand what they've read. So the key to this equation is not force them to read according to a book list, but help them develop an appreciation and help them become interested in what they read. Okay, now this is going to be a big shift for a lot of parents because I know a lot of parents are like, Stephen, give me the book list. And you guys will have the book list. And right now you guys can already go check out the book list, right? Which is on the website in the description. But the key is to find a topic of interest that your child is interested in, right? And to encourage them to read more along those lines. Because kids will read what they're interested in, right? So if your child is really interested in video games, obviously, if they start reading a lot about video games and video game programmers and how video games work, they're going to be intrigued because that is a subject of interest. And so the key word that I have for you is interest and passion. Whatever they're interested in, whatever they're passionate in, that's where you should start their reading journey. That's where you should start their reading process, okay? And I'll kind of give you some examples of what's worked really well for kids and students that I've had in my past, and the exact categories that you should start with. So the very first thing is that every child has a role model. Okay, so every child has a role model. Your child might have sports role models. They might have, celebrity role models. They might have role models in terms of humanitarian role models like Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King. So when I was little, the thing that really got me into reading was reading autobiographies. Okay, reading biographies and reading autobiographies, right? That was really, really important. Reading biographies and reading autobiographies. Okay? So that was the thing that really made me, interested, really got my excitement up, right? And that was really when I first fell in love with the whole reading process, right? Again, what I would recommend if you're a parent is that you should try to do the same with your child. You need to find out what they're interested in. Start with autobiographies, start with the role models, and see from there, okay, wait a second, there are all these biographies, let them read it, see if if the sign of an interested child is when a child starts reading instead of playing games, right? That's when they've clung onto a good book. So instead of trying to find this generic list of books that, are published online, really you need to ask your child, hey, what are you interested in? You know what I mean? I read biographies of, Malcolm X. I read biographies by, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I read biographies by all of these really famous people that I looked up to, right? And as a process, that opened my world into different issues, right? Political issues, geographical issues, issues between different nations, right? And so once that opened up, because I started becoming interested in topics that were mentioned, then I would start doing even more research and reading even more. The other thing that I would say is a good way to get started reading, things of the non-fiction texts is through reading autobiographies, but also spending more time on Wikipedia. You know what I mean? Get your child to do, research projects. One thing that I really enjoyed doing when I was younger, when I was in OC, was I really enjoyed doing research projects. You know what I mean? When I was in year 4, year 5, year 6, we'd be given these huge research projects. And as a result of just researching for these projects and writing up these, 3,000, 4,000 word, PowerPoint slides and, these speeches, you would go through and you would obviously need to read a lot. And the other thing about doing a research project is that you actually learn a lot through that process because you're applying what you read. Okay, that's the most important thing. You're applying what you read. You read things and then you need to write stuff down. You read things and you need to write stuff down, which is the best kind of reading. The applied reading is what you want to do. The non-applied reading, which is just sitting sitting back in an armchair, just relaxing, doing absolutely nothing. That is not the type of reading that you want your child to do, right? So whatever form of reading that encourages your child to write about it, that's what you should be doing, right? And I'll talk about different measures, how you can measure how much your child's learned, and how you can integrate the whole reading and writing process together. But like a great example would be, working on a research project, right? Research projects aren't hard. You know what I mean? You can find any topic you want. So if you want to talk about the invention of the computer, ask them to do a research project on that. Global warming, do a research project on that. What's them called? Things like electrical vehicles, autonomous vehicles, ask them to do research. You know what I mean? If you guys are interested, just comment down below research and I'll show you guys how to actually structure this so that you guys can do it yourself. So comment down below research if you're interested in this. What you need to realize is, the medium of reading doesn't really matter. Whether they're reading nonfiction through books or whether they're reading it on the computer, it doesn't really matter. In actual fact, it's probably better to read nonfiction on the computer and apply it through a research task. Right? So that's also something you need to understand. And more importantly, you need to make sure that you're able to link the reading with the writing. Because like I said, the writing is where they're actually learning, where they're actually applying what they learn. And the writing is also where they're like learning the new vocab and applying that. Because again, if they're just reading passively, they're not going to memorize anything. Okay? So that's really important. Now, another thing that I wanted to talk about was, in addition to kind of autobiographies and doing research projects, one other kind of thing that you guys can utilize is, reading the most iconic books of all time and asking your child to read through SparkNotes guides. So I'll show you guys what I mean. What I'll do right now is I'll kind of switch into the desktop so that you guys can see. So for those of you who don't know already, if you go to the description, you will be able to see this, okay? So if you actually go to the scholarlytraining.com website and then you just type in #reading, you will be able to see this. And immediately at the very bottom, you'll see here it is, document which we're going to go through right now. So you just need to click on that, and that'll get you to the book list. Now I'll kind of go through the books, and I'll kind of describe what you need to be aware of, okay? So at the very top, I've started off with some books, some very, very general kind of autobiographical books, as well as some social psychology books, just so that kids will get curious and kids will become interested, right? So here I've got Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. These are basically books which contain, a collection of anecdotes and stories, which are very, very interesting, right? So I think the best thing to do first is just to give them a little bit of this excerpt online, right? So if you just type in Blink, Malcolm Gladwell, you'll get these, you'll be able to find, if you just type in PDF. Okay, here we go. You'll be able to find out what I'm talking about. And so if you just start reading from the top, you'll find that, the Malcolm Gladwell series is really good at just encouraging kids to become interested in nonfiction texts, right? So have a read of this. I would highly recommend having a read of this yourself first before giving it to your child. But what it's going to allow you to do is, it's going to allow your child to become interested in a broad range of different topics. And then from there are other book recommendations that I can definitely give you that'll help them just kind of read more and become more interested in reading nonfiction. Because let's face it, if they're reading most nonfiction books, it's quite boring, right? I don't think anybody likes reading nonfiction. So these books will really, really help you, improve in terms of your child's learning. Okay. The other thing that I want to mention is I've put a couple of biographies here. So Elon Musk by Ashley Vance is a very interesting book because, again, it's an autobiography that, relates to obviously one of the most iconic inventors of our day. I've included some other biographies like The Diary of Anne Frank. So that's really iconic. That's very, very famous. Again, all of these biographies I've chosen because they somewhat relate to either very significant historical events, right? And again, after reading, the experience of these people, then obviously, the kids will start becoming interested in those events, right? So that's a really good way, a really good segue to get them interested in, researching history and becoming mesmerized by that. Okay, so that's what I'd recommend. Start with Blink, The Tipping Point, Outliers. These are all really good books. Elon Musk, Ashley Vance, that's also a really good book to read. And then after that, you should probably start with Diary of Anne Frank. Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. That's also a really good book, just to develop your kind of interest in kind of these important historical events, right? Now, that's kind of the nonfiction section. Here I've got some fictional books. So obviously, if they haven't read the Harry Potter series yet, they should probably read that as soon as possible. After Harry Potter, generally The Hobbit by J.R. Tolkien is a good option. After that, I would probably recommend Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Basically, all the books that I've listed out here are iconic, right? They're famous because, they deal with really kind of important themes, like recurring themes. Like, for example, To Kill a Mockingbird deals with the theme of, racism, discrimination, all that kind of stuff. Some of these books are well beyond the years, well beyond what you're expected to do at a selective school level. But nonetheless, I would still say that they're quite, they're quite good to read. The other thing that I would mention is alongside these books like To Kill a Mockingbird or Lord of the Flies or Of Mice and Men, like let's say these three books, the best way to actually get them to understand it is to, number one, ask them to read the SparkNotes version, right? So if you go online and you type in SparkNotes, that's a really good website where you can just learn about these books, right? So if you just type in SparkNotes and you type in To Kill a Mockingbird, right? That'll allow you to obviously learn a lot about To Kill a Mockingbird. Obviously, you'll be able to get through the summary and analysis, and you'll also be able to read the plot overview. After you've read through all of that, then you can go back to the text, and that'll allow you to obviously understand the text a lot better, right? So I'll definitely recommend reading these summaries in conjunction with the books. Okay, read these summaries in conjunction with the books. Again, the books that I've listed out here, To Kill a Mockingbird, Lord of the Flies, and later on even here like Elman, 1984 by George Orwell, Animal Farm by George Orwell. These are books that you typically read later on in high school. Again, if you've got a really gifted child, exposing them to these books will prove very fruitful. The other thing is you obviously need to read these books alongside a study guide, which is going to be SparkNotes, right? So if you guys can all just write down SparkNotes, that's a very important website. And basically all these books you can find on SparkNotes, right? So if you type in 1984 SparkNotes, you'll be able to find it. Again, this is for like the top 1%. This is for kids who are going for, scholarships. If you're just trying to get into a top 10 selective, you don't really need these books at all. Okay. So, don't beat yourself up if your child doesn't understand any of these books. The last kind of, I'd say, starting from To Kill a Mockingbird onwards, these are for, really, really gifted kids, right? So just keep that in mind. If you want to just start reading, these three books at the very beginning are the best to start with. Okay. So hopefully you guys are all clear. Hopefully you guys all understand that. What we're going to do right now is I think we'll switch back to the camera and I'll talk about, how much should you read and how to actually go about balancing everything. Okay. So in terms of the actual reading time, obviously the more you read, the better it is, right? But you also need to make sure that you're being practical, right? So if you've got let's say for example, you're currently in year 4, and you've got the OC in 5 months time, it's probably too late to start reading, right? So what I would recommend is you need to prepare for the exam more, right? If you're in year 6, year 6, obviously it's too late, but let's say even if you're in term 3 of year 5, it's a little bit too late, right? The perfect time for you to start reading is if you're currently in year 5, you can definitely encourage your child to read. But generally what I would say is, if you're reading for the purposes of improving reading comprehension, understand that doing the reading comprehension by itself will already get you to about 80-85%, which is going to be enough for any kind of top 10 selective school anyway. Okay, so it's not like you need to read this to get into a top 10 selective. You don't, right? Reading is really to help you get that extra edge in writing, and really to get that extra edge when you're interpreting really, really difficult passages that you're going to get in the selective and scholarship exams. And if you're aiming for schools like Sydney Grammar, if you're aiming to get a scholarship like Newington, Shaw School, any of the big private schools, or Pymble Ladies, then obviously you need to read. But if you're just aiming for a top 10 selective score, if you just want Sydney boys and all Sydney boys, you don't really need to read. You know what I mean? You need to spend a little bit more time on doing actual real comprehension questions. The other thing that I want to say is that the Cambridge test is very much non-fiction based, which means that, again, reading is going to help you, but you still need to do the questions because the questions in Cambridge are very specific. They're very much like closed passage, evaluation. And again, it's better just to practice doing those passages rather than read. So reading is more getting you from 80 to 100%. Doing reading comprehension passages will get you from 0 to 80. Okay, so hopefully that clarifies everything. Even like, for me, I don't go about doing novel studies for my younger children because they're not mature enough to actually understand anything. Okay, so I only start doing novel study with really bright kids at year 5 and year 6 levels, and then obviously year 7 onwards where you do only novel study, all right? But I see a lot of big coaching colleges, do novel study with younger kids, and it's just really a waste of time. What I mean by this is I've done this in the past, and young kids, they're either interested in the book or they're not interested in the book. And if you're just studying one book in front of all these kids, you don't know if all the kids are going to be interested in that book or not, right? You're much better off just practicing reading comprehension. So just be aware of that. I know there are parents out there who are going to say, Stephen, my friend who's an absolute god at English, their kids, they only read, they don't do any reading comprehension. Again, that's most likely a lie. Or number 2, they're really, really, really good at reading. Okay? That might be possible, but again, from what I can see, unless they've got a very, very strong foundation in reading already, it's probably best to, do something else, right? So to supplement reading comprehension with reading, in terms of proportion, you should probably spend about 2/3 of your time on reading comprehension and 1/3 of your time on reading. Okay, that's it for me today. Again, if you want to have a chat about any of this, there are so many thoughts that I have on all these different topics. If you want to reach me directly, the best way to do it is, again, fill out the form on scholarlytraining.com. If you just go on scholarlytraining.com, there will be a pop-up, come up directly. You guys can obviously do the diagnostic test if you want to get your kids tested. If you want to know what the actual ability is, we have diagnostic tests for year 3 all the way to year 5. And then we also have a writing diagnostic test as well, so we can give you feedback on, what your child's writing ability is like as well. If you want to have a chat about anything, feel free, again, fill out the form. There is no obligation at all. Fill out the form. I look forward to hearing from all of you. That's it from me today, and I'll see you guys all soon. By the way, before I go, if you do have any questions, either number 1, reply to my emails, right? So if you're not in my email list already, make sure that you join, right? The easiest way to join that is, again, fill out the form on www.scholarlytraining.com, and you'll automatically be added to my email list. So whenever I come up with a new live webinar, you'll see it. You know what I mean? I know Facebook and YouTube, they're very weird in terms of how they display all of these webinars. So sometimes you don't get notified, right? Even if you're subscribed or even if you're in the group. So what I would recommend, join the email list because then you'll 100% get the email. And yeah, you'll be sorted. So opt in. That's it for me. Thanks, guys. And I'll see you guys all very soon.